Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Martin L.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to next session in Schwarzenberg Hall of GLOBSEC. We will now go to discuss some numbers which will be introduced by GLOBSEC turns ladies, to say so. Dominika, Hajdu, Director for Policy and Programming from GLOBSEC, and Katarína Klingová, Senior Fellow from GLOBSEC. Before we then go to discuss the topic shielding democracy and strategic priority for Europe's future. So first, ladies will introduce us some interesting numbers, and then we will discuss them and develop some shield questions for the future. Thank you very much. And Dominika and Katarína, please.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good afternoon. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen.
Hope you're enjoying the first day of the 20th edition of GLOBSEC Trends.
We are here to kick off this discussion with a short presentation from one of our flagship reports, which is called GLOBSEC Trends.
And it is a report which showcases public attitudes in Central Eastern Europe. Through the trends, we are able to assess the risk, the vulnerabilities, but also long-term trends in this region.
And it also celebrates a special anniversary.
Yes, this is the 10th edition of the GLOBSEC Trends.
And you can find the rest of the trends near the Albright stage at the mezzanine floor. And we actually co-authored 9 of them.
Yes, so virtual high five. Those who have already been at the GLOBSEC Forum know that it has become a tradition for us to do a short presentation and present some of its key findings at the main stage.
And to make this more interesting, we have a short quiz for you. So if you could all please take out your phones and go to Slido, which means that you would either scan this QR code or you go to slido.com and select a hashtag, which is GLOBSEC Forum SCH, like the Schwarzenberg, the first 3 letters of Schwarzenberg.
Yes, and while you're doing that, let me tell you more about this edition. So we analyzed the region's readiness to build resilience and looked at its willingness to increase defense spending. We also tested people's understanding of hybrid threats.
And with this goal in mind, we found out that the perception of Russia as a security threat remains widespread. On average, 64% of respondents across the region perceive Russia as a threat, which is for us a good sign. But the understanding of specific hybrid influence tactics varies.
And that leads us to the first question. Which hybrid influence tactic was perceived as a threat by most respondents?
Was it paying to local journalists and politicians to secure influence? Was it establishing own media channels, espionage or increasing number of spies, or creating energy dependencies?
So let's have a look at the results of the poll. And, you voted incorrectly.
Yes, the correct answer was espionage.
Indeed. As you can see on this graph, yes, we have the graph, increasing number of Russian spies is seen as problematic by the majority of the respondents. On the other hand, the region is the least concerned about Europe's energy dependency on Russia. So this is definitely a gap in understanding of strategic understanding of threats.
Now, let's move to a different question on China.
Only 33% of only 33% of respondents perceive China as a threat to their country's security. However, attitudes towards China vary across the region. While 53% of respondents in Czechia perceive it as a threat, in Bulgaria, it is only 15%.
But the threat perception is higher in case of China when it comes to specific hybrid influence tactics. And so our question to you is, how many respondents across the region consider having Chinese companies buying newspapers in Europe, which happens in some countries in Europe, a threat? Is it 36%, 46%, 56%, or 66%?
So let's see how you voted. And you voted incorrectly. The correct answer is 56%.
It looks like you should be also able to read the GLOBSEC trends. They are everywhere across the hotel. You are able to find them. And as the graph shows, the strategic infrastructure ownership, such as ports, railways, or bridges, was perceived as the riskiest by the region, whereas having Chinese tech in communications infrastructure was perceived as a threat by 46%.
But as you can see on the next slide, the understanding of hybrid tactics of Russia and China differs across the region. The most aware to the threats of the Chinese influence are respondents in Lithuania and Czechia.
And in case of Russia, you can see that Lithuania leads as well, with Poland, Latvia, and Czechia sharing the same level of threat awareness.
But now let's turn to the last question.
So in the report, we have also covered the questions around democracy, as we cover every year. And across the region, 84% of respondents believe that democracy as a system based on equality, human rights and freedoms, and the rule of law is good for their country.
This is an overwhelming majority, which has not changed in years.
But we also identified a paradox. Many people who believe that democracy is good for their country also believe that it doesn't exist.
Therefore, our last question for you is, how many respondents across the region believe in a conspiracy theory that the democracy does not exist, but in reality, hidden elites rule the world? Was it 27, 37, 47, or 57%?
And let's look at the results. The correct answer was 47%, so actually quite a lot. And as we can see on the slide here, yes, no, that's the next slide, sorry. We're back. Most people believe this narrative in Bulgaria, and the least in Estonia and Czechia. So good job to our host country, we are proud of you.
Our data shows that there are various factors influencing people's belief in conspiracy theories. One of them is media literacy. The higher the media literacy, the less people believe in conspiracy theories.
And another is a consumption of traditional news outlets. In countries where people chose quality traditional news outlets as one of their top sources of information, the trust in conspiracy theories was lower.
So I hope we gave you some food for thought and pointers for the discussion. Dominika, please take your place on the stage, and I'll pass the floor to the moderator of the next session, Martin L.
Thank you very much. I have a theory, maybe conspiracy, that my microphone is struggling with my glass. So I will be, if I do this, so it's nothing else than the technical problem. So let me invite Nathalie, Loiseau, member of European Parliament, to our stage. Renate, Nikolay, Deputy Director General for Communications, Networks, Content and Technology from European Commission, and Sławomir, Sierakowski, President of the Program Board of Impact CEE. To make the introduction shorter and short enough for us to start a discussion, I summed up very long, about 3 paragraphs of what organizers prepared for this panel, that we are going to talk about democratic resilience in digital world. And the question I'm adding to that, and I will be teasing you all the time, is: are we doing our homeworks? Because we already seen on these numbers that we have let's call them enemies, because our friends in the East are already in the war mood, and I think we in Europe are supposed to get into the war mindset as well, at least into the war mindset, if not into the war economy. So there is a lot of talk about resilience, and I would like to, in the first round, ask you, as a citizens of your respective countries, what do you consider as the weakest point of your home country, home nation resilience, and what can be done on the national and possibly on European level to strengthen or improve this 1 point? 1 point, let's say 3 sentences each. Dominika?
So my home country is Slovakia, so I have a little difficulty to choose at the moment. But I would say it's a systematic lack of investment in education. That's the first sentence, which then leads to susceptibility to information manipulation. It drives voter behavior. It drives the lack of understanding of geopolitical changes, the tech advancements, and also it drives lack of situational awareness across different sectors.
Nathalie?
My home country is France. I would say a lack of social cohesion. We are very easily divided, which opens vulnerabilities to adversaries to fuel our divides and tend to make us believe that democracy might not be the best option. What we should do more is working, of course, on media literacy and make sure that the approach is a whole of society approach, not a top-down one, but empowering civil society to participate in the effort.
Renate?
I'm German, and I would say also talking from the last elections, where I was quite involved in our election integrity work. Germany is not different from many other member states in really lacking the situational awareness of the ever-evolving threat landscape that we are seeing. When we had a year ago European Parliament elections, there was quite an important moment in the German debate when the doppelganger campaign was discovered, when a first attribution in the German debate was kind of made to Russia. But since then, the threat landscape has evolved. Also in the kind of hybrid threat landscape where you have cyber combined with online manipulation, and there Germany is not prepared, and many other member states neither.
Sławomir?
I'm Polish. 2 weeks ago, I would represent the victory over populism. Now I represent the loss to populism. I'm talking about presidential elections. I would say that polarization, but not political, because it's too easy answer, but social. So province is the weakest point, especially in Eastern Europe. In province, the tradition of political liberalism is the weakest, and the trust to social institutions, including state, media, is also the weakest. So either we will do a kind of a social change, not invest economically, because it's not underinvested in Poland, but really invest in serious cultural, social change to make cohesion. Otherwise, we will have two Polands, two Frances, two Americas.
So after this round, we have a food for thought for next 2 days. So we will sit on the tables here and talk for next two days. Well, ladies already introduced you the Slido. So please, if you feel you have a question to the panel, put it on the Slido. I would now go a little bit farther on the EU level. My opinion, and you can challenge me, is that the biggest problem I see in our topic is the disconnection between European elites and citizens and between the national states. So basically, people in Brussels or in capitals are talking differently, and we saw it in Poland just recently about topics of everyday life than people in the provinces and in the small cities. They live these problems. My question to you is how to bridge that to strengthen the democracy, or if you consider that the biggest or common European problem, or if you would add to that, or if you would disagree with me? Dominika?
I do disagree with you because I've just recently moved to Brussels, and I lived there also 10 years ago, and I do think that sort of the Brussels bubbleization is weaker than it was 10 years ago. That there is a much stronger connection with the member states. But I also believe that the EU is representative enough to have the common problems and common issues of the citizens to be represented through the members of the European Parliament who represent the states, through the Committee of the Regions, through different institutions. So I do believe that there is a representation at the EU level. I'll stop there.
We have a similar problem in Czech Republic. Do we know how to use this representation in Brussels? Do you in Slovakia, or do we Czechs?
I do think we are able to use the representation in Brussels, but we do not communicate about how we are using the representation in Brussels to foster our interests at the EU level.
Is France agreeing with me?
I'm afraid I'm not totally agreeing with you. There are parts of what you're saying which are true. That is to say, the technocratic language that use the European institutions, and I'm including the European Parliament in it, makes it absolutely impossible for average European citizen to have the slightest idea of what we are doing. All the acronyms, all this entre-soi, we would say in French, trying to impress each other with our technicity is exactly what people don't like. But at the same time, if you look at Eurobarometers, I wouldn't say there is strong support for the European Union. There are very strong expectations towards the European Union from European citizens. And it started with COVID, because even if conspiracy theorists and extremists disputed what the European Union was able to do, actually the European Union was able to protect citizens. And then the war in Ukraine, even if we are not doing enough, even if we should be faster and bolder, people realize that we are strong together facing a common threat. So expectations are high. Visibility is higher than what it used to be. But when you have high expectation, you must make sure you don't disappoint your voters. That is to say that when we take decisions, when we adopt legislations, we should implement them, we should enforce them. Renate, you know the conversation we just had, because otherwise this would be a gap in democracy.
But is expectation management, to say so, good on the side of politicians? I would slightly doubt about your president, for example, who raises a lot of expectations, like in GLOBSEC a couple of years ago about his relations with Central Europe. And then execution, I don't see.
Well, maybe you don't see, but maybe some people see, and at least you're right to mention that the speech in Bratislava was sort of a game changer in the position of France and a number of, I would say, founding members of the European Union towards the Russian threat and the war in Ukraine. But you know, French citizens are also very tough as regards politics. They are very avid and critical consumers of politics.
So Renate is the representative of the Brussels bubble, sorry to say so. So how do you see this gap between EU elites and citizens? How would you explain that in Görlitz, for example?
Mm-hmm. I think the Brussels bubble can always learn to kind of get better at explaining what we do. And I think there has been, when you look at the transition from the previous commission to this commission, there has been, I think, an important learning exercise. And in terms of listening to a lot of the kind of the feelings out there that Brussels is distant, Brussels is seen as over-regulating, Brussels is seen as not really talking to the needs of the citizens and businesses. And if you look at the political focus and the guidelines of this commission, you see a very, very strong focus on three aspects, and that's competitiveness and security and democracy. And honestly, I think this speaks to a lot of kind of citizens across the European Union. And whether I'm in Görlitz or whether I'm in Porto or whether I'm in Bratislava, I could make that speech and explain in terms of examples why that matters for the ordinary citizen there. I also would kind of, add and echo what Nathalie has said, that, Europe very often is forged in crisis. And I think the geopolitical context around us show that there is a different conversation in European councils when you compare with the conversation conversations that we had a couple of years ago, that there are different conversations and solutions found about addressing kind of, imminent risks around us. We also look for, a geometry variations, the group of the allies who kind of work together ad hoc, even kind of stretching beyond the EU borders. If you take the UK in that perspective, when you look, for instance, at Ukraine, I think there's actually a lot of, interesting new attempts to kind of make Europe better understandable for everybody and impactful. And I think that's what we need to show. And the context around us, I think, gives me hope that if we get our act together, we can actually show that Europe offers solution instead of, presenting problems.
I will not tease you, and I will ask the sociologist, the sociologist's view, because I would have a little bit like more critical view on that, because to explain certain things to people in Görlitz or in northern Bohemia, which is that forgotten region, you would have a little bit troubles, to speak about Europe being forged through crisis.
Wouldn't use that.
We will have an election campaign, or we already have. So we will see how it will go, with these European topics. Because so far, no party in Czech Republic has picked up the Europe as a positive topic to win with. Sławomir, how do you see that from your perspective?
So Görlitz is a border town, right? So
I picked the town deliberately.
Good. So what is the truth in Görlitz? Maybe not the truth, or the opposite in Zgorzelec, which is like Teshin, similar situation. So I'm afraid that when I remember the last elections, the relation to Brussels in Polish society is the function of local politics or local polarization, not even the politics. And it's I would say, very paradoxical situation, because Brussels was extremely friendly to Poland in last year and a half. When there was a flood in the southern Poland, Brussels immediately found like 5 billion euros. Like this was like really huge support. Then recovery fund, then the border on the east, and in like fortresses, in like really huge effort and financial effort. Donald Tusk immediately organized money from Brussels. Same with weapon, defense policy, etc., etc. Like actually, if you would like to find a like really good and spectacular example what Brussels can really do for local people, like the really grassroots people, take 1 year, take Poland, okay? And what was the impact on elections? Nothing. I'm not saying that then don't care about Brussels or so on, but the problem is that, and now I'm going to be the sociologist, Brussels has to start making politics in a way as it is being made in the States. So be a little bit sometimes smart, sometimes populist, like enlightened populism, like Macron or Tusk or Zelensky are like enlightened populists, I would say. So using some tools, but to fight real populists. What I mean is that, and as a sociologist, I can tell you that usually we perceive populist or nationalist parties as a group of fanatics, because we see conspiracy theories, because we see social media, etc., etc. But what you really have when you do the empirical research, not only surveys, but qualitative research, is that there are usually two electorates. One is fanatic, but another one is cynical. And another one can really disagree with everything, what Kaczynski says. He's unelectable in Poland. For the last 3 decades, he's the most hated politician, like 60%, 70%. And then you see 40% in elections. So this 10 to 15% are fully cynical about it. And I'm talking about the cynicism in sociological terms. So rather like Peter Sloterdijk defines it. So it's not that like bad guys. These are guys who have paradoxical attitudes. So on one hand, they can disagree with everything what populism is known for. And on the other hand, when you see social transfers well targeted, then they choose this when they live in province, first of all. Because in province, mainstream media or judiciary or all these liberal institutions are not really even visible. But what is visible are these, like, smart moves sometimes used by populists. So, like, I would say that Brussels to be a little bit more populist, but be a little bit more political in this sense. If you don't want me to give a ritual answer that it's technocratic, etc., etc.
We have a couple of questions already in Slido, and one of them is connected with what we are talking about. Do you think that the whole of society approach is a viable solution for strengthening the democracy of all EU countries? Who would like to pick up this one?
I would be quite happy to pick it up, because I definitely think that's even the only way. And some territories do it well. If you go to Taiwan, for instance, there is this whole of society approach, which makes Taiwan quite resilient, despite the depth and breadth of Chinese interferences. That is to say that it's not the government which debunks disinformation. It comes from civil society, which has been empowered to do so. And considering the distrust towards politicians and even towards mainstream media, which is quite widespread in our societies, empowering people to have their say and to build their own resilience, their own democratic resilience, is certainly much more effective than having a top-down approach. And look at what's taking place in Ukraine as well. Of course, we are all listening to President Zelensky's speeches, and he's an excellent communicator, and we should all learn from him. But you see from all around the Ukrainian society initiatives, websites, blogs, influencers, who carry the message with a lot of efficiency, a lot more efficiency than what we are doing as politicians. So yes, I do think so.
I have, and we have also one question connected to the United States, because we have seen on the tables here the relation toward Russia as a threat, toward China as a threat, but somehow we don't still kind of not familiarized the possibility US as a threat. I would say, is this defense of democracy in Europe complicated by what's going on in the United States? Or, as somebody is asking, will they remain an ally of liberal democracy or promoter of illiberalism in Europe? So basically, how to deal with that, relatively new situation?
Well, for now they are promoting liberalism in Australia, Canada, and etc. So I'm not sure whether we should stop them. But, well, I remember from Munich Security Conference after Van's speech that, like, Western Europe was pretty much crying, Eastern Europe was motivated. Well, look, of course you could interpret that Nawrocki victory in Poland was because he was supported by Trump. He was not really supported more than just a selfie with Trump in Washington. This was actually quite pathetic or embarrassing. I'm not sure whether it had any impact in Poland, because it immediately disappeared with so many scandals that are in biography of Nawrocki. So many scandals, actually, that when liberal media were revealing one after another 3 times a day, the perception was that this candidate, no matter how bad he is so attacked that we have to identify with him, no matter whether he was a pimp, or the guy stole a flat from an older person, etc., etc. This is another tragedy. Like I said something about the tragedy of Brussels. Now we can say that in the tragic situations are sometimes liberal media. They have to make their work, they have their efforts, but sometimes they are very counterproductive. This is another thing that we have to discuss and solve, by the way. But when it comes to America, Poland is in a very specific situation because we are not a trade problem for America. We pay more money for NATO by percentage than Americans. We are more American than Americans, I would say, sometimes. So they don't talk much about Poland. Even if Sierakowski is a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and you know who is his wife, and also Donald Tusk, who is not also the poster hero for Trump, etc. So Poland is in a very specific situation to it. We're going to see what will be the consequence. But for now, nobody says anything about Poland, at least nothing critical, even if they would love to. Or even if they are completely perceived as completely crazy guys in Polish political elites.
Anybody else wants to?
I would like to comment on that. I really think that I would look at the Trump administration challenge from a European perspective. Europe is learning it the hard way to deal with its dependencies. There was a moment where we had to deal with the dependency on energy from Russia. There was a moment where we are still in the process of dealing with, our dependency on export markets in China. And I think at the moment we are looking at a dependency in terms of a lot of the structures around us, whether that's security, whether that's the kind of, value structures where the transatlanticism that very much described our approach to politics since the end of the Second World War, whether that can stay as it is. I believe in the strong institutions in the US, so I don't think that I think it's too early to say this is already, the end of democracy somewhere. But of course, when we are looking, for instance, at our tech sovereignty in the future, this is very much a debate where we have to look at dependency from, in particular, US firms. So I wouldn't put it all in the same kind of basket. We are dealing, with partners that differ. I certainly also hope that once we are kind of finding, hopefully, an approach in a negotiated approach on the tariff context at the moment, that we can identify similarities again, also with this administration. But I think the broader exercise that is necessary for Europe to really define against the geopolitics of today, there, the US will also have to be factored in.
You brought me to my own question. We have a lot of questions in Slido, but I couldn't resist to ask this one. And maybe all of you, please tell me, what do you think about it? Because I heard it from one Czech politician that one of the solutions for this dependency on US tech would be to create Europe-owned social network.
Sure.
Would that work? As a way to decrease dependency on the US?
Well,
we can start from Sławomir.
I don't want to steal too much time, but well, I'm not going to talk particularly about social network, but I understand that you're talking about having European Soros, having European agencies, etc., which is not a bad idea. So like having kind of a civil society that plays as a global partner, and also including America. But for sure, what happened because of Trump is that three countries that usually had a huge problem to find a consensus switched to be very convergent. Poland cannot be that transatlantic anymore. Germany cannot be that pacifistic anymore. And France cannot be that Gaullist anymore. So we have much bigger common interest, and you can see it now also not only in talks, but we just signed the Treaty of Security with France. The new Treaty of Security will be signed with UK soon. Like elections between Merz, who is new, and Tusk, who is not new, can be very, very good. So I think we are going into, we're getting a good lesson. And I think we are really learning pretty well and finding solutions much, much deeper and stronger and faster than before. EU was well known for hating making decisions. Now it learned how to make decisions, and it is doing it.
Dominika, would that help in case of Slovakia, which is really in deep 3 points in terms of information environment?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I'm not sure what is Slovakia specifically, but I do believe that increasing competition within any products is a step towards positive direction. So I would say that having alternative platforms of information consumption that would be based on sort of different kinds of rules with different methods of advertisement could be positive. The question is then how, when we're talking about social media platforms specifically, is how do you persuade the people to change their media consumption and information consumption behaviors, right? people are already very much dependent on certain set of platforms, and I am strongly against banning any kind of platforms because this is a very thin line and very dangerous. So it's difficult, but I would say that there are new opportunities, of course, as Europe is trying to get more and more autonomous in various spheres, and with the rise of AI, there are new opportunities to create new platforms that would be working on different mechanisms.
I would look at it mainly from the perspective of the common market, because we don't have a functioning digital market where in Europe, so nobody can compete on that, on like as a European company. Any specific comment on that?
I would be happy to comment on that, because my answer to the first question, should we have European platforms or social networks? Definitely yes, 100% yes. Let's enter the game. China was nowhere to be seen 2 decades ago. And now TikTok is number one platform for young people to get their news on. So they didn't say, well, we are not good at it, it's only American. They created it. And why don't we do it in Europe? Of course, it should not be a public initiative. But we should create the conditions, a real digital single market, a real capital market union, so that investment money can support startups becoming bigger companies and providing with what we are missing. Of course, we complain with American or Chinese platforms for not promoting the same sort of values that we would like to see naturally. And why wouldn't we be able to have something palatable, trendy? Very often in this market, if you're the youngest, the newest, you are more trendy than the older ones. Look at Facebook now. Facebook has become the network for boomers.
But then you stay in front of the question how to make something European popular with European, and I'm a little bit skeptical about European approach to PR, in terms of how to make something.
Well, don't give it to the EU, give it to
attractive.
European citizens, but don't give it to institutions. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
We have 2 popular questions on Slido. First one is connected not with Europe itself, like European Union, but with the neighborhood. Is there anything Brussels can do to help democratic society in Georgia, where the populist government is drifting away from the West and moving to Russia? Can we do something about it? If we are not, I would add, able to do that in Moldova or Ukraine?
Well, I think if you take these 3 countries, then they are very different at the moment, because in Moldova and Ukraine there is a very, very strong cooperation now also in Moldova ahead of the parliamentary elections at the end of September, and Ukraine for obvious reasons. Georgia had a democratic election.
A non-democratic election.
With a result that we have to kind of deal with, but we deal with it in our kind of context of our neighborhood policy, where we can also ask questions, But it's, of course, in the end, we can certainly influence. We can be a partner with, a very interesting offer. But, in the end, it is the kind of the decision of people in Georgia that we can facilitate. But, where, I think in the end, we have to kind of convince with our policy that we are showing in the neighboring countries, Moldova and Ukraine, so that, hopefully we will see different developments in the future. That would be my approach to that.
We have a couple of other panels about the neighborhood, so I would move to another question, maybe to Dominika. You mentioned trust in institutions in the US, but talk about democratic resilience in Central and Eastern Europe. It is mostly about civil society. What about independent institutions? Are there some numbers from GLOBSEC trends about that?
And the trust towards independent institutions?
Yeah.
Well, in some countries, you cannot really ask about trust in independent institutions if there are no independent institutions.
You are not mentioning Hungary.
But I'm I mean, the trust in institutions in across Central and Eastern Europe sort of copies the trust towards institutions or the average trust in institutions in the EU. It is lower in countries which have had political turmoil or which have a strong capture of the institutions and the media. For example, in Bulgaria, there is a really low trust in the institutions because they've had so many elections in the past 2 years. There is a lack of continuity in those. But I would say that the sort of crisis of trust is not unique to Central and Eastern Europe. It is definitely stronger in some countries due to, as I said, political reasons, but it is a broader challenge that we must deal with across Europe, of course.
There is a specific question to Renate. How should Germany better deal with hybrid threats, especially cyber and disinformation? It's again for half-day seminar, I would say.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of debate going on, and I think the work that we are doing at the moment in the context of the Democracy Shield will hopefully also kind of, lead to a more informed debate across the institutions in Europe on how we can get better on the whole situational awareness. There are very good examples in some member states. For instance, in France, there's Viginum as an interesting kind of agency, interministerial agency that really is monitoring and detecting quite well hybrid threats and always top-notch on technology and science. There is in Sweden a very interesting center on the psychological preparedness of the society. These are very good examples, and I know that there's a lot of interaction already happening, and I know from my contacts with Germany that they are looking at what they could kind of, maybe create within their structure. That has to be a national kind of, decision, but certainly inspired by examples in other member states, so that we are all lifting up our kind of respective monitoring capacity, because I think that will be key for Europe to be better kind of, cooperating in the future, to have a better, information exchange on the monitoring of the integrity of the information space.
There is also a specific question about Hungary. How can the message get through that the threat against Hungarian free media and the rule of law is the first tilt of a domino that endangers Europe as a whole? So Hungary as a first domino. Has anybody opinion about that?
Well, Hungary is not an easy issue, but I can say that connecting this question to your first question, if I wouldn't choose province, I would choose Eastern Europe. What's the problem for the EU or post-communist Europe? If you don't believe that Eastern Europe still shares some certain features that makes it Eastern, not Western. If you look at Eastern Europe and even simple political history, let alone social history or religious history, how would you expect to have trust to institution when Poland was not on the map for 123 years? Or when it was on the map, it was a satellite of somebody, Russia. For 300 years, for 75-80% of this modern history, we were either a part of Russia or a satellite of Russia, or part of Germany. Well, and this is same for Slovakia, that was not on the map for 1,000 years, right? Ukraine, same, etc., etc. So, people usually perceive institutions beginning with the state, right? And then, of course, universities, trade unions, etc., etc. But if you will create a span or a spectrum from the Western Europe to Russia, in Russia there was never one single institution that was independent from the state for entire history, right? Not noble class was independent, not any institution. So distrust to institutions is kind of a pre-assumption to it. So if you want to do something with this, do something with this. I mean, as Brussels, as Western Europe, we cannot just pretend that we are in a similar social or mental, cultural situation. It's not only about finance, because, Poles and Hungarians are not Euro enthusiasts, Euro fanatics. EU gets North Korean results in rankings when it comes to support, 88%, 90%, 82%, even if, by the way, in Georgia, this Georgian dream that's supposed to be called Russian dream has in logotype the EU symbol. half of the logotype is, stars, EU stars. So everybody is pro-EU. But then when you break it down to concrete acts, then it dismantles immediately. So financial support, formal support, legal support, all of it makes sense in Western Europe. But if you want to have not only formal integration with the EU, you have to make it informal, in a sense that you have to make it also mental, cultural. And it won't happen just like this. Somebody mentioned education, right? The only way you can stop reproducing social attitudes is the school. Right, so I'm waiting for the government in Eastern Europe where the most important minister will be not financial minister or even foreign policy minister, but education minister. Usually when it comes to education, NGOs comes, media comes, mainstream media comes. So, but the problem is that we still fight for independence in Eastern Europe. Like now, independence from Kaczynski. So whenever there was a discussion during the process of fighting for independence, there was always people that were talking about educational liberal media were like saying, like shut up, because first we have to win with Kaczynski, win with Russia, win with somebody. Okay, so I'm like pushing Polish elites to play on both pianos. Like, well, let's fight with Kaczynski, like in media, but let's do with the second hand, like cultural change, including Hungary, of course.
We lost a couple of minutes, I was just told. I had one last question. So it's in one word, what would make now Europe more popular as a safe haven of democracy? Let's do it as a quick PR lesson, starting from Dominika.
Liberal market.
Really strong support for Ukraine.
Renate?
Predictability and standing for values.
Sławomir?
I don't remember the question, but I remember answers. I will answer supporting Ukraine.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our session. Thank you very much for the discussion. Dominika, Hajdu.